Come prepared for what is to come.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Oscar Buzz. Trevor here. I'm joined by Thomas, and we are going to argue today. So we are talking about Dune Part 2. This is one of the most hyped, most anticipated films of the year. And Letterboxd thinks it's like the greatest movie ever made. I did not like this movie. Thomas, like a normal human, did. So well, we can start off with you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start by sort of prefacing my rough thoughts on the first Dune. I liked it as setup. I didn't think it worked as a complete package within itself. This I have very different thoughts on. I think it really does work as this not only a continuation on a lot of the stuff set up in the first one, but almost as just this complete package within itself. I really sort of appreciated from it. Obviously, it is leading up to a third one, but I didn't necessarily feel that. I do feel the arcs of the characters are complete in this one, or at least arrive at a lot more completed stage than they did at the first one. I think the scope is just expanded upon in a very good way. I loved all of the elements of tech. I mean, you could rave on and on about the elements of the technology, like sound and sort of how it just constructs this world. And I think it just does that amazingly, where you just want to spend 2 hours 45 wrapped up in this world. You just want to become completely absorbed into it. So yeah, I was a massive fan.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just start off generally. I think that we feel pretty similarly about the first Dune. Though I did prefer the first Dune to this one. I would say. For me, a lot of the problem is with this film is that I think it loses. I think the first film benefits a lot from the world building, because Denis' style is. I mean, you know, I like Arrival a lot, but the style of filmmaking in the first film, it isn't my sort of thing typically. I'm not typically drawn to, you know, big sci-fi action type blockbusters. But I do think that there is a nice bit of like interiority, and it feels lived in with the first film that I think is just completely lost with this, to the point where everything feels like it is motivated solely by plot. And it feels like the film isn't taking anything else with it. Like, I'm told that character arcs are happened, right? I'm told world building. I'm told the thematic ideas, but I don't think that the film ever arrives at a point where you can feel them and it feels like visceral. Like, none of the world building felt like it felt like it was tacked on rather than feeling like an essential piece of the film. The character arcs, it felt like I was told what Paul's character arc was in this, but I don't think that we ever really saw that. Like, yes, the visuals are impressive, yes, the sound are impressive on a pure technical level, but I don't think that they really did much to serve the ideas of what the film is actually doing. It felt very much like grandiosity for grandiosity's sake, and spectacle for spectacle's sake, rather than spectacle in service of developing the ideas of the film.
Yeah, and I guess where I counter this is that I think through Paul's arc, you need this grandiose scale. So I think that's where that comes into it. I don't think it is just for show, just for spectacle. I think it really does tie into the character arcs going on, and just to build out this scope that you need for this sort of like Messiah type story. And I also do think that the tech elements really do help you become invested in the world, like the way that the sound matches the visual effects. Like every sound feels real. And
I'm not
feels
arguing that on a
believable.
technical level it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I just feel like those
But I think
technical
in
elements
creating
were
this believable world,
divorced from everything else. Yeah.
sure, but I think you do still get that, because I think the film allows for a good amount of time to breathe with the characters. Like, you get a lot of sort of smaller moments where it is just Paul and Cheney, but you also
Yeah.
do get the big ones. And I think Denis is able to really it never feels out, nothing ever feels out of place. It's not like, okay, now we're doing a small character based moment, now we're doing a big action set piece. Like, it all feels quite cohesive in that manner. It feels like we're always leading up to something. And a lot of that is through plotting and just unraveling this mystery, which I just found the plot and the narrative of this film to be quite fascinating within itself. That's obviously something that I know you don't always quite connect with when it comes to films, but I think that every element sort of worked to just build and build and build, and then you end with this big climactic action set piece, which is very satisfying. I think it does pay off most of the elements that it sets up. There is one which we'll touch on later that I don't think works.
And we are going to talk about spoilers with this, by the way.
Yeah,
We are going
yeah.
to But with what you said about the world building, yes, it's immersive. I guess, but it feels more like it's more focused on aesthetic rather than actually developing a lived-in world. Like all of this stuff with like when it's in like black and white, right? Like they're striking images, they're bold images, but they why? Everything about this film just felt unearned to me. Like it was just Denis was just like throwing things at the wall that he thought were cool, but nothing actually connected in its ideas. Like I honestly think that the visuals are pretty bland and dull, because like yes, there are striking images, but they aren't doing anything, and it feels like it's just playing the same aesthetic note over and over and over again without any motivation. Like, okay, the light is doing interesting things, but there's no motivation behind it. It just is. And I think that that's a lot of the issue. Like, I mean, this is why I defended women talking cinematography when that came out, and I think it's some of the best cinematography like of the last or of this decade so far in the 2020s, because like I think we have this idea that good cinematography means pretty cinematography, but good cinematography is cinematography that services the narrative and services the themes. And I think that something like women talking cinematography does that excellently. It establishes the mood. Whereas I think Dune cinematography, it's always trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger, which I do think negates a lot of those quieter character moments, as you were saying. Like I think it worked better in the first one, or like Craig Fraser's work on like the Batman, because he's able to play with like architecture and stuff like that, to create these interesting shapes that can box in characters in interesting places within the frame. Whereas this, he's operating a lot with just wide open desert, and I don't think that style of cinematography really services those ideas, and it just comes across feeling very flat to me visually.
I don't know, because I mean, I guess you said two things there, that the cinematography, I guess, should service the mood and the narrative, or the themes and the narrative. And I genuinely think it does both. I think it establishes narrative, because Denis, he really often, he doesn't tell you what's going on. There's a surprisingly little amount of exposition for the amount that you as
I feel like we watched a different movie,
the
because I
amount
felt
of
like the entire movie
information
was
that you as an
exposition.
audience, no, for that maybe for the plotting elements, but for the amount that is able to establish characters, who they are, very quickly. It establishes power dynamics very quickly. It establishes character very quickly without exposition. I feel, in terms of the plotting, how we get from one stage to the next stage, maybe. In terms of character development, I don't think so. And I think a lot of that is done visually with these striking images. They do give you a very clear sense of where everyone's place is in this world. And in terms of the themes, I think you need this big and this grandiose scale to make Paul's journey work. It doesn't work if you don't
But what
feel the
are the
stakes. You don't
themes?
feel.
This movie isn't about anything, but it thinks it is.
It's I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I think it's a lot to do with religious oppression and how and where they're created from.
I
And I think
agree.
the film services a lot of
It,
different perspectives on that matter, which I thought was interesting. Like it creates a lot of play. It's got the skeptics. It's got the believers. It's got the creator. It's exploring so many different perspectives and so many different characters, that I think you do get a good sense about these sort of debates and these ideas. And then, yeah, it's about power, and it's in many ways a coming of age story in terms of how you should handle power and
but
how power comes
I
to you.
don't feel like we get that. Like I feel like there's absolutely no development to characters beyond their necessity, like their necessary pieces for moving the plot forward. Like the Fremen. Like we learn absolutely nothing about them except what we need to know for like setting up the third act with the fighting and the battles and stuff. But
But I
like
don't know if that's true, because I think through the production design and through just like smaller elements, like when some of the Harkonnen die and then they just inject something and take the water in them, like that's a piece of development that we didn't need to know about the Fremen. but it just sort of aids in making this world feel lived in, I guess.
But I guess it's just one note. Like it addresses it and then moves on. Like it
But I think
never
it's
actually.
different things that it can't. It's inherently quite a broad story, and I think it's able to capture that. And you don't need as much development when you've got so many moving pieces to focus on, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know if we can just. I don't know. I don't know if you should just give him pass. Like, oh, the story was really big, so maybe he shouldn't have to care about character development. Maybe he shouldn't have to care about actually developing themes. Like, you can make a very broad a film with a very broad scope, and also like just do the fundamentals of developing your world and your themes and your characters.
But I think the
Um,
broad. I don't agree that this film doesn't do that. Still, I guess it
I
takes
think
this
it's a
broad scope.
loss. Like I think everything is half developed and like half baked, but I think it tried like this film should have been like 4 hours, and I would have been perfectly fine with that. But I got bored with it because it never seemed interested in actually developing any ideas. It seemed more interested in just bringing something up, touching on it quickly, and then moving on to the next thing. And like take your time, sit with the characters, because then that just gets boring, because then it just feels like it's doing the same thing over and over again. Brings up interesting idea, it'll address it briefly, there'll be a fight sequence, and then you move on to the next idea with no actual like engagement with the complexities and intricacies of this idea. Like there's so much thematic richness that can be drawn from this story, and it just feels like all of it is left untapped in favor of the broad spectacle and scope. And you can have both, but you can't rush through every single narrative beat without giving like a moment to breathe, which is what I think that this film does. And I think that just gets boring when you're just, like it doesn't even seem interested in like creating a dialogue with the audience and in creating these engaging themes. It just more seems interested in acting as a plot delivery machine with pretty pictures.
Whereas I guess I don't know. I think that the themes do aid the grandiose scale and vice versa. And you need a lot of different perspectives. You need a lot of different pieces moving. And just on a practical level, I don't know if I do agree that it should have been 4 hours. I like the efficiency Villeneuve has in storytelling and in delivering the most, in a fairly reasonable amount of time. Like he's very efficient in the way he establishes stuff. And yes, you could say it means he doesn't take moments to breathe. I don't think that's true as Paul's character. And since Paul is the central through line narrative, like he's the central part of this all, I think that it needs to just focus primarily on him. Therefore, and yes, I can concede that maybe some of the side characters don't get development, but their function is really just in aiding Paul's journey. But I think Paul's journey is interesting enough to sustain itself, and I think
Right, which
Chalamet
is why I think that we
is
should have
commanding
focused
enough in the world.
on Paul's journey, and instead it tries to do, I think,
But we
way
need
too
other
much.
stuff to build out the scale and to make Paul's journey make sense.
I don't think that you do. I think that that's the easy way out, and I think that that's the simple way to approach this narrative and the obvious way. But I don't think that the first option is always the best option. I think that there's a much more challenging way to construct the film that I think is far more interesting, and has so much more depth. And this just felt like it was just I don't know. It felt very very obvious in the way that it tried to tackle this narrative in a way that just felt very, very flat and kind of uneventful. Because, as I said, it was never interested in actually engaging with anything that it brought up.
But I don't know, because I feel like the ideas that it has are maybe fairly obvious, and you do kind of know where it's going. But I think that it's aided by this just being such an immersive experience and this being such an absorbing world to dive into and to experience. Like its main motivation of the film is to just transport you, and I think it attaches a number of very interesting ideas to this central idea of just transportation, and therefore, like it doesn't necessarily matter in my mind that not all of the ideas are maybe quite fleshed out as they could have been if you did make it a 4 hour film. It's not that's not the primary interest of the film. Therefore, I don't Yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
wouldn't
and I know
necessarily judge it
I
in that
never
level.
felt transported by this. It felt like the film was like actively like very cold and pushing me away and not wanting to invite me into this world. And this just also like I just people always talk about like, oh, the films that transport you, like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and these big fantasy sci-fi worlds. I've never felt that. Like the type of films that I get like incredibly immersed in and wrapped up in are like things like Jean Dielman or like weird like experimental stuff by like Stan Brakhage or something like that. Like that's the stuff where I feel like I can like feel the film and feel like every element on a technical level of what the film is doing. Like Perfect Days was a film for me that did that last year. Zone of Interest was a film that did that, where I felt like I was just like stuck within the whims of the director, and that's the stuff that I feel like really transported by this. It just I don't know, it never felt like it was, again, it never felt like it was interested in doing anything beyond plot delivery. And I feel like it almost borders on like this like fetishization of like bold imagery and striking visuals, to the point like not every frame has to look quote unquote like where it could show up on like a one perfect shot like Twitter page or something like that. And that's what the cinematography felt like to me, which is why I think I felt so disconnected from it, and why for me it felt so disconnected from the narrative, because it felt like a film that was designed like it was created to be pretty visually first, and then to marry the technical elements with everything else second.
I don't know, because I think with a narrative this bold, I think stylistically it makes sense to go for a very bold and striking palette and aesthetics. I
But then
think when
I
you've
think it just
got
gets
a narrative
dry
this grandiose,
at a certain point if it's just like
but I think the more fundamental difference is that you weren't actively engaged in the plot to the same way I was. Whereas I think that the plot is interesting enough to sustain itself, and you've got enough moving
sure.
pieces,
I
and it's
thought
a
that the
nice
plot was
puzzle of
like
a film.
very obvious and quite dull.
Exactly. Whereas I think I genuinely think that the plot really does marry together all of these elements and just create, as I said, this film that I can only describe really as an experience. Um, yeah,
I don't know, like everything, like Austin Butler's character comes in, and I just feel like it's very obvious where that character is supposed to go. And so I've seen this film twice now. I was a bit more positive on first watch, and I think that is because not knowing what's happening next is like really the only sort of tension I had while watching it. It's just that basic narrative tension of what's going to happen next. And once that was kind of lost on me for second viewing, I really don't think that there's anything there to engage with, because how I personally like to engage with films, and again, this is just a personal thing, but I'm most interested in engaging with the themes. I think that like looking at just like what the filmmaker is trying to say is the most interesting thing, especially on a rewatch. Once you've gotten through that initial, oh, what's going to happen next? What's the narrative, right? And I think the best films will reveal more to you on that. And rewatching this, it felt like it was just it was it was a really frustrating experience, because it never felt like it got anywhere and like it was saying something coherent. It just felt like it was throwing out big ideas without any meaningful commentary on them. And I do think that for a blockbuster like this, like examining like religion and the want for like a messiah figure in the face of oppression and violence and war is such a fascinating topic that deserves a complex exploration. And for how much dry exposition is in this film, because it did to me just feel like 3 hours of exposition. For how much of that is in the film, it never actually arrives at saying anything. It feels like it's just like talking itself in circles while there's like again like these like bold striking images in the background that to me just felt very disconnected from even what I was trying to say. Like it could have at least like you don't always have to get somewhere perfect with your thematic building out of something through the screenplay, and sometimes the visuals can fill that gap, and it felt like there wasn't even like an attempt to connect those ideas, at least to me. So
whereas, yeah, I don't know. Just I'll reiterate the point that I think that you need the grandiosity in the aesthetics to make Paul's journey impactful. And I think that a lot of it is done in just character arcs and the completion of the character arcs. I think that is where the film sort of maybe doesn't take on meaning in terms of the thematic exploration, but still arrives at something very satisfying, intellectually, just seeing the arcs transform. I think that still stimulates a sort of adjacent pleasure too. Sort of
And I guess to
analyzing
me,
thematic
everything
there.
just felt unearned, like Shawnee's journey.
And yeah,
Like
this is a bit this is a bit
and this is the part where we agree on, but for both Shawnee and Paul, for me, like I felt like we pulled away from them too much. Like I don't know, everything about their relationship was just very, very formulaic. And again, it felt very obvious, and it like I don't know, it felt like I could feel the plot beats being played out in front of me. Like it felt just so inorganic that so much of the film and the portrayal and the Shakespearean drama that you're supposed to feel by the end of the film hinges on their relationship. And it felt like we just spent so much time like starting and stopping on other ideas that never went anywhere, that we didn't actually spend the time necessary to develop the most important idea of the film, and in my opinion the most interesting idea. I think that there's some genuinely like really great stuff between those two characters towards the beginning, and with Rebecca Ferguson, who's just completely forgotten about for a lot of the film. And I think that she has a lot of interesting thematic stuff to play with, but rather than expressing it in a subtle way, it's just all done through a dialogue between her and a talking fetus, right? Like that you could have done it in a much more like, especially with what she's doing in her performances, right? You could have done, gone into her mind, all these types of things, but it's just done in a way where it's just like, oh, we need a character there so we can bounce ideas and express exactly what she's feeling at all times. And again, it just, everything about this film feels like it was just the first most obvious option without any attempt to do things in a more interesting or subtle way. And I feel like that for Paul and Shawnee's relationship is the case, where it felt like the most obvious and inorganic and unsubtle way of developing things, to where it just felt kind of plastic, and I didn't feel any of the emotion that I was supposed to during the big betrayal moment that's supposed to be like the big emotional and thematic climax of the film. And it just felt dry because it didn't earn any of those moments.
I don't know, because I think the narrative is more focused on filtering things through Paul's perspective, and therefore, because you need, like, I think you do need to focus fairly heavily on him. And I agree. I think the main problem with the relationship for me was that I just didn't really buy the chemistry between Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet. Like, I thought Timothée Chalamet, outside of that, had a very commanding presence. I was really impressed and blown away by him. I never bought the chemistry though with Zendaya, and therefore that relationship and that aspect, it didn't really do it and go there for me. Because by the end I was like, I wasn't very invested in what was going on. I do agree, it is a fairly generic, fairly one-dimensional relationship. But I don't agree that's the main driving force of the plot. I don't know if those are necessarily the biggest moments in a vacuum. They're big moments and they're meant to be more emotional than they probably were for me. But I do think there is enough other stuff going on in just that sort of the final 10 minutes that it doesn't really matter in my mind, because when you're still paying off other stuff. Yeah. And I'm sure like this thing with the third film, I'm sure it will go into more depth with their relationship.
And I'm still excited about the third film, to be completely clear. Like I'm still looking forward to it. And we also talked about this a little bit yesterday before we recorded, about how for me, I don't think that action sequences and fight sequences are just, I don't think that they're very interesting ways to resolve thematic ideas. Like, yes, you can say, okay, we've laid out this theme and then we have two conflicting viewpoints on it. How are we going to resolve this? They're just going to fight in a big battle. And I understand that this is just the type of film that it is, which is why I prefaced at the beginning, this is just not my type of movie. Like, it just isn't. But I think that that's just the most obvious and non-subtle way to engage with a theme and to complete a disagreement on a theme, is just have the two characters fight each other, or have the two opposing viewpoints and the two these armies that represent these two opposing viewpoints on this thematic idea, just have them do a big fight. And it's like, well, that isn't stimulating at all. That isn't interesting. That isn't like a creative or interesting way to engage with and complete that thematic journey. It just, again, it felt very cheap to me, especially when I didn't respond at all to the visual style. That was
I don't know
very
if they're necessarily all there to resolve thematic stuff. I think they're just
resolve wasn't
there
the correct word.
to
I
build.
guess
I think
just,
they're there to build on it. And as I say, through this ambitious sort of scope, we get like big action set pieces. I think they work in conjunction with the rest of the film. I think they're very impressive to watch. I do think they have inherent value there in just engaging that part. And this is the thing, like, again, its primary motivation is in delivering this story. And for this story, you need, and adapting the story for the screen, you need to have to go big in terms of the action sequences. And I don't think they disappoint. Like, I agree, like, action scenes aren't always my favorite. Most action films don't really work for me, but that's when I think they are overly reliant on the action set piece. These, I think, they're combined so seamlessly into the rest of the narrative and the rest of the plot that it's never reliant on, oh, when are we going to get to the next action scene. I think it's a lot more subtle in that you're excited for the next aspect of the plot. You're not waiting constantly.
I guess for me, it feels like the action set pieces are doing a lot of legwork just because of how underdeveloped I think everything is for the majority of the runtime. That I guess how I engaged with the film while watching it, since I didn't feel any of the the development earlier, it felt like the action set pieces were doing a lot of the legwork. And I do think it's interesting because obviously I'm in the vast minority with a dissenting opinion on this film. But I have seen the people that have been the most negative on it have been the people who like read the book. And again, very big generalization. I think that most people who love the book still probably like this movie, but that's where I've been seeing the most dissenting opinions. And they share a lot of the sentiments of this being, or at least people have read about the third act just being way too rushed and it's skipping over a lot of plot points. And I am wondering if, since it went so far down for me on rewatch, for people who, again, on first watch would have known exactly where the narrative is going, if potentially that was also an issue that I don't know. I don't think that there's that much to engage with this film beyond the basic delivery of the plot.
Maybe, but I think it's done in such a impressive way that, like, I agree. Maybe on rewatch, this film wouldn't quite work to the same effect, but I think as a cinematic experience, as of now, I think it's very impressive and it deserves a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
I've
you
not
can
read the
respect
book,
something
so
without liking it. Like,
yeah.
And again, it's, the visuals, the sound, obviously impressive. I was not a fan of the score. It felt incredibly overbearing. But
yeah, I think it did in parts. I think mostly it really worked, again, to
Fair.
sell you on this atmosphere, to sell you on this tone.
But yeah, again, I think that, if you bring these to just basic like photography or something like that, like, yes, very, very pretty. It felt like very uninterested in just using the form of film. And it just felt like it was like, using film as a surrogate to just express the same narrative ideas as the book, but it never felt like it actually used film really as a way to tell this narrative beyond just pure aesthetic, right? And the aesthetic
I
of
think
the sound and the
I
aesthetic
think
of the
it did
visual.
with marrying these elements together, though, to create
Yeah,
something
I just don't
cinematic.
think
Like,
it does.
you
I
can't
really
do
feel
that
like
anywhere else. You
it's just,
can't marry the sound and the grand scope anywhere but film. So therefore, I do think it is best served. I do think it serves
I mean,
itself
I guess
well.
maybe it's just the bare minimum that you can do. Like, I don't know.
Maybe, but I think it's focused so heavily on doing that really, really well that I still think it comes off as a satisfying product as a
And I guess the
whole.
difference is I don't think it even did the bare minimum very well.
Yeah,
Is I
sure.
think where we differ.
Yeah.
So yeah. This is annoying though. I was genuinely really excited about this movie. I know I talked with you about it. You can attest. I was
Yes.
excited about
Yeah.
this.
No, for sure.
I was not going into this wanting to dislike it. And like, as an action blockbuster, it's better than basically everything from, Marvel and DC and superhero shit. Like,
Yeah.
better than,
Definitely.
most recent Star Wars movie. Like, it's doing what it's wanting to do. I think to a serviceable level. It's just I'm just not the biggest fan of what it's wanting to do at a fundamental level, and it never really gave me a reason to care or make me want to care more than I already did. And I was hoping that it would, because the first film has grown on me a little bit, which is why I did want to rewatch this. And yeah, unfortunately, it just went down. So I don't know. I again still excited about Dune Messiah, because I do think that there's so much here, and I think a lot of my annoyance with the film is just frustrating, because like I do feel like there's a lot here, and it's really close to me really engaging with it and liking it, and it just feels like it's, you know, if you're like filling up glasses and you got to get all the way up to the top, it feels like it's getting like 70% up the way with like 6 different glasses, and I just want like a couple of them to get full up, so that way I can, like, you know, get in on the love for this. And it feels like I'm so close with everything, but yeah, nothing really pushed me over the edge into liking it, I guess, really. So
yeah, and some things were pushing me under the edge in terms of loving it. As I say, I think the
yeah.
relationship stuff, it is quite important. I don't think it's the most important element, but yeah, and that really didn't connect with me. So
Yeah.
if we're looking at ratings, I'd probably be looking at 8 out of 10, I'd say.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it like a 5. I'll throw it a
Yeah.
solid 5
But
out of
8
10.
leaning towards 9, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think I'm like dead even in a 5, like just right in the middle. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I wanted to like this. I know it sounds like I'm just a, you know, hater the entire time on this. Like I did genuinely want to like this. And yeah, I don't know. It really didn't do it for me. I didn't ever feel that like cinematic magic that everybody else is seeming to get from this. So that was Doom Part 2.
There you go.
I'm sure there's already fucking 20 comments about
Probably.
but whatever. I don't know. We'll be talking about more films here. Love Lies Bleeding, maybe. I don't know if that one that comes out in the UK, but more movie reviews, more Oscar stuff, plenty more things. The Oscars are this week. That's crazy. But yes, thank you everybody for watching. I'm sorry. David Lynch's Dune is the best Dune, by the way. We will see you guys later. David Lynch's Dune is a good movie. Talk to you later, everybody. Goodbye.
Really quite bad.
Shut up.